Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And today we're going to talk about Scott Herman. And Scott's one of those channels that I generally like, but every now and then he just comes out with some total BS that just kind of needs to be knocked down. But you know, honestly, Scott's one of those guys that these days about 90% of his content is actually really good, really on point. I really like that a while back he started really telling people they need to just focus on the basics of big barbell lifts and maybe some curls if they want. And you know what? I think that's perfectly reasonable and actually amazingly fantastic advice. If every fitness YouTuber promoted what he promoted there, then we wouldn't have half the problems we have and everybody be making more gains. But he uploaded a video which got linked to me by half a dozen people on Instagram, which I'm going to flip in here. Damn. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. All right, a lot of problems here straight up front. And this kind of goes to show, you know, the video I made about rack pulls, which will be linked down below. He was one of the guys promoting it. Guys, this is why, a perfect example of why rack pulls don't work. All these guys can lock out all this insanely heavy weight on rack pulls, but then when an actual deadlift gets there, even with 495, he's struggling at the lockout and actually could not lock it. That is a failed lift. If that was at a powerlifting meet, they would rule that he was not strong enough to lock the weight because he had to hitch and he had up and down to the bar. And you guys need to keep in mind that will tear a bicep. And I'm speaking as someone who has torn a bicep. That shimmying and jerking at the top with a heavy weight, when you've got a hand that's supinated with mixed grip, exponentially increases the chances of tearing a bicep. It's not fun. I have been through it. Scott's setting himself up for injury with that shimmying like that. Pick a weight that you can lift. And he's like, if he's like, well, I haven't deadlifted in a while, then why did you go for something that's an all-out grinding max? That's heavier than your competition max, because that would be a failed lift in comp. Why did you try to lift it then? You know, just like me, guys, I was doing rep work with 545 at New Year, and then I went several months without deadlifting. Would you guys see me start back with 405? Right? 405. And I was deadlifting again for 6 weeks before I even hit anything over 550. 6 weeks. And I still haven't done a max, have I? It's called keeping your ego in check. That's a big problem right there. He just was not strong enough to lock it. Again, kind of shows you guys how useless rack pulls are. All that heavy lockout work doesn't even carry over to your lockout, does it? Not at all, because you're weak off the floor. Other problems we see immediately, the setup. All right, setting up without a neutral neck. You notice he's bent over, almost flat back, and thoracic rounding is fine. Thoracic rounding is the rounding of the upper back. For advanced lifters, thoracic rounding is perfectly acceptable, and it's an advanced technique. I use it myself. It just seems natural to me. It's not something I consciously do. It's just natural to me. But it is for more advanced lifters. Thoracic rounding is fine, but he had lumbar rounding right from the very start of the pull. Right from the very start of the pull. And it's different. Sometimes you can have a rounded lumbar when you set up. If you use like a pre-motor unit slack technique, which I'll demonstrate for you guys here in a bit. I'll flip one of my own deadlifts in. You'll have a rounded back before you drop your hips. But once you drop your hips into position right before the pull, your lower back flattens out. It flattens out once you pull your hips into the right position. He started with hips too high, completely rounded back, and what happens when you bring your head up at the start, if you don't have a neutral neck, because he's looking forward instead of setting his body, if your head comes up, it's because you've dropped down into the right position for it to come up. And then sometimes you're going to have, your head will move sometimes as you're approaching the lockout. That's perfectly fine. And this is for conventional guys. Sumo has different mechanics. There's a different situation going on with sumo, and that's more than we can really cover here. More than we can cover here. With head position. Totally different beast, and yes, I know there are elite lifters who look up on the sumo. On your conventional, the lifting up of the head like that will cause more rounding of the back. right? It will cause more rounding in the back. It's going to put your back into a bad position. It's going to increase your chances of getting hurt. It's just going to increase your chance of getting hurt. And he's starting bent all the way over, head all the way up. The shimmying at the lockout, not strong enough to lift it. All around recipe for disaster. And you know what? I wouldn't even be that critical of it, but you've got someone like Scott who actually does, because he does promote the basics. You've got a big audience of people who are interested in the basics. And he's promoting something like this. You're going to see people who might emulate his form. They might think that what he's doing is acceptable, and we're going to start seeing injuries. And I hate to see that, because the deadlift is my favorite exercise. And it's one of those exercises that gets a bad reputation for injuries. So if you have someone like Scott with a big following who starts deadlifting heavy and he hurts himself with 500 pounds by doing the lift incorrectly, what's going to be the downside? I don't know, 1 million of his followers are suddenly going to think the deadlift's a bad, dangerous exercise. When in reality, it's not. It's the execution of it. It's the execution of it that matters. And for those who want to understand the difference, I'm going to go ahead and flip in one of my deadlifts. All right, there's a difference, guys. That was obviously a hook grip, no belt, submaximal lift. But you notice the total biomechanics difference. Neutral neck at the start, still using thoracic rounding, but dropping the hips into position. The lower back goes flat right before the pull. You pull it clean, you lock it clean all the way to the lockout. No hitching, no shimmying at the top, just a clean pull. But notice my back and neck position throughout. Notice the foot position. Everything is set up for an efficient line of pull. An efficient line of pull, and that's what you want, guys. That's what you want. You know, and again, notice I'm doing this as kind of the hard way. There's no belt involved because I don't need a belt necessarily. Doing the hook grip, everything raw, using a pre-motor unit slack technique to pull the slack out of the bar to drop my hips into position. All right? Just a nice clean line of pull, and that's how you set your back up, guys. That's how you set your back and your neck up for a pull. That's the safe way to do it. And if a weight's so heavy that you're having to shimmy at the top, you need to get your ego in check. You need to get your ego in check, because not only is that not a good lift, it wouldn't even pass in comp, your injury rate goes up exponentially, particularly for people who are choosing to use the mixed grip. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.